First of all, quickly to introduce myself, my name is Lara and I'm the Community Manager at European Leadership University. As most of you know, we are a new generation university. We offer exclusively graduate degrees in on-demand fields like data science and cybersecurity, first and foremost. But we understand that professionals, even in the tech field, need to be well-rounded. And this is why we also always focus on the interpersonal and leadership skills of our students. And today I'm very excited to be here with Whitney Johnson. So welcome, Whitney, and thank you again for accepting to be our speaker today.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. And I know we're going to move along pretty quickly because we've got only about a half an hour, but I am excited to have a quick conversation with you. I'm going to go through the content and then Laura will let me know if you have any questions and see if we can get those questions answered for you. So let's move ahead and talk about growth. We're going to talk about your growth, the growth of the people who you go to school with, that you work with, your team, your organization. And the one thing that all of these players have in common is you. The fundamental unit of growth in any organization is the individual. Always the truth, always the case. So we follow a pattern. We start at the bottom, grasping for knowledge to accelerate. I'm sure you feel that way whenever you start a new course, and probably when you started this degree, you're at this bottom of the curve and not quite sure how to put everything together. We then get into this sweet spot where we're in a groove, and then we reach the top where we know what we're doing, but we're worried about stagnation, and so then we have to jump. So that's what growth looks like. And what we're going to talk about today is how do you make that happen? And the question that I want you to all ask yourself is, how do you make this possible? How does this growth become possible? And the very short answer is that you disrupt yourself. Let me tell you a little bit of my story and what that disruption looks like or has looked like for me. When I graduated from college, my husband and I, we moved to New York so he could get his PhD at Columbia. And I would never have gone to New York on my own. It was a very big city for me versus where I had grown up. I had grown up in a smaller, more suburban area in California. And I can still feel how afraid I was as we drove across the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan. For the first week, I wouldn't go anywhere by myself, but we needed to eat. And so I had to go out and get a job. Because I had never set foot in a business course, it turns out that I had studied music in college. I had zero connections, very little confidence, and at the risk of stating what is probably obvious to all of you, I am a woman. My first job was as a secretary to a stockbroker. Across from my desk, there was this big bullpen of young stockbrokers trying to become masters of the universe. Pressure was intense. They would say things like, throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And at first, I was a little bit offended because I had been a cheerleader in high school. But after hearing this again and again, realizing I'm going to be working at least 5 years because school can take a long time, and my husband's PhD took 7 years, I realized I needed to throw down my pom-poms and get in my game. Maybe you've had that experience where you've realized that you needed to get into your own game. You were sitting on the sidelines and you needed to get in the game. And I would not have known to call it this then, but that was the beginning of me disrupting myself. I started taking business courses at night. I started taking accounting, finance, economics. I then had a boss who was willing to let me grow. And so I was able to move from secretary to investment banker, which doesn't happen very often. I then moved to become an equity research analyst, left Wall Street to become an entrepreneur, met Clayton Christensen at Harvard and started a fund with him to invest in disruptive innovation. And now, many more disruptions later, I'm an author and researcher and created this framework of personal disruption, created this framework, the S-curve of learning framework, that I get to teach to organizations around the world that I'm talking to you about very briefly this morning. But that was the beginning, and that's my message to each and every one of you today, is to disrupt yourself over and over and over again. Now, what do I mean when I say disruptive innovation? It's a term we hear a lot. So what do I mean? Well, actually, before we do that, the thing that I want you to be thinking about today is like, as you listen to this, how can you grow faster? Because that's really the question. How can you as an individual grow faster? We've talked about you disrupt yourself, but what does that look like? And so let's drill down on that a little bit. And let's go to that question of what is disruptive innovation? It's a term we hear, but what does it mean? At its simplest, it's a silly little thing that takes over the world. That's what a disruption is. Like the telephone did to the telegraph, the automobile did to the horse and buggy. More recently, we've seen Netflix disrupt Blockbuster, and Uber is disrupting cabs. Well, personal disruption is how you take all of these ideas and make them meaningful to you. And that was really my first big insight in working with Clayton, is that this theory of disruption, it's not just about products, it's not just about companies, it's not just about countries even, it's about you. It's not about products, it's about people. And you start at the bottom of a ladder, you climb to the top, and then you jump to the bottom of a new ladder, like the children's game Chutes and Ladders. The big difference with personal disruption, this is the big difference, is that you are Netflix and your Blockbuster, your Uber and your taxis. You're this silly little thing and you take over the world. You're the disruptor and the incumbent because you are disrupting you. That's personal disruption. It's a cycle. It's a cycle where you learn, you leap, and you repeat. Now, this is frequently where the S curve comes in. You may be familiar, you're in data science, you may have seen the S curve before. It was popularized by E.M. Rogers in 1962. It looks a lot like a wave. We use it typically to look at how quickly an innovation will be adopted. At the base of the S, growth is slow until a tipping point is reached or the knee of the curve, and you move into hypergrowth. And then at saturation, that growth tapers off. Well, the big aha that I had was disruption's not just about products, it's about people. I also had an aha that this could help us understand how we learn, how we grow. What does it tell you? Well, whenever you start something new, like you started your degree, you start a new class, you are at the base of the S, and growth will be slow. It will feel like a slog. You might get discouraged, maybe even overwhelmed. And then you get into the sweet spot where you know enough, but not too much. It's hard, but not too hard. It's easy, not too easy. And this is when you're in hypergrowth and you're enjoying yourself and all your neurons are firing. And then you get to the high end of the curve where you knew it was the right role for you, but now you're starting to get a little bit bored. And so at the bottom of the curve, you were kind of overwhelmed. Now you're underwhelmed. Now you're a little bit bored, experiencing the dilemma of personal disruption. Whether you jump or not, there is risk. So something that I want you to be thinking about, and I think in the interest of time, we won't do this, but you could, maybe Laura, maybe people will want to, is in your current role, in your work that you're doing, where are you on the S curve of learning? And if you want to do it from work perspective, you can, or you can think about it from a school perspective. In your degree, where are you on the S curve of learning? Are you at the low end of that S curve? Are you in the sweet spot where you're about halfway through? Or are you in the high end where you're saying, okay, it's time for me to graduate? So in your current role, in the work that you're currently doing, where are you on the S curve of learning? So love to hear, Laura, any people sharing where they are in the chat?
For now, all good. No questions for now, I think.
Okay. All right. We will keep going. So this is what growth looks like. You start at the low end of an S curve, you move into the sweet spot, you climb to the high end, you learn, leap, and repeat, you disrupt yourselves. Sometimes when people hear this, they say, oh, well, but if I disrupt myself or the people that work with me disrupt themselves, then they're going to want to leave. And sometimes that's going to be true. But the fact is that high growth organizations need high growth individuals. They need people who know how to learn, leap, and repeat. They need people like you who are going to school and figuring out how to learn. You're learning how to become a high growth individual. So what we're going to do now is, well, what does that look like? So you know you start at the bottom of the curve and you climb to the top. Well, how do you do that quickly and effectively? I'm going to go through 7 accelerants for you very briefly of what that might look like. By the way, if you want to go up, you disrupt. May not work quite as well in your native language, but certainly in English. If you want to go up, you need to disrupt yourself. So here's accelerant number 1. You take the right risks. So taking the right risks means, here's what it looks like. So competitive risk is, you look at it and you say, well, there's a big opportunity. I just have to figure out if I can compete and win. That's competitive risk. Market risk is, you wonder, well, if there is an opportunity, but we don't know if there's an opportunity, then there's no competition. Now, you're used to thinking about this in context of products and services, but it also applies to you. So for you in your career, competitive risk looks like there's a job that you want, but 10 other people are applying for it. So you have to figure out, can I compete? Can I get this job? That's competitive risk. Market risk looks like, well, if there is an opportunity, then there's no competition. Like, I created the job, and that's part of what you're doing by being in school, is you're saying, I'm going to go study data science. I'm going to go get this degree. I'm going to create an opportunity for myself. So the very fact that you are here at ELU would suggest that you are looking for ways to take on market risk. And the reason that we do that is that the odds of success when you take on market risk are 6 times higher. The best way to think about this is you're basically playing where no one else is playing. And then I'll summarize it with this idea of amateurs compete and professionals create. So that's the first accelerant of personal disruption. You take the right risks, amateurs compete, and professionals create. So that's number 1, take the right risks. Now let's go to accelerant number 2. I'm checking the time. Okay, I think we're good. Play to your distinctive strengths. And your distinctive strengths are things that you do well that people around you do not. Like the koala. What you may not know about this koala is that it sleeps about 20 hours a day. So you wonder, how is it possible that it survives if it sleeps all the time? The reason it can survive is that it eats eucalyptus leaves, which are poisonous to pretty much every animal and human being. And so this is its distinctive strength. The challenge for some of you, you may be thinking, I don't know what my strengths are. Well, here are a few clues. Number 1 is, ask yourself, what makes you feel strong? Marcus Buckingham says that our strengths clamor for our attention in the most basic way. Using them makes you feel strong. You feel invigorated, inquisitive, successful. And so if you don't know what that is, then over the next couple of days when you finish an activity, just say, do I feel strong or do I feel weak? If you feel strong, those are one of your strengths. Second thing is, what exasperates or frustrates you? Where you say, well, this is just common sense. Everybody knows how to do this. That's another clue that you're good at something. And then the third clue is to ask yourself, well, what compliments do I dismiss? And the way that you think about that is, when someone gives you a compliment, do you just like brush it off, or do you write it down and say, okay, this is something that I am good at? Those are all clues to your strengths. The thing to remember is that we tend to overvalue what we're not and undervalue what we are, which is why your superpower may not be on your resume, which is why you sometimes hire people into the wrong job, because they talked about what they did well, not what they did best. So if you want to move up this S curve quickly, you will not only play where no one else is playing, but you'll do it in a way that you're leveraging what you do uniquely well. You'll play to your distinctive strength. Okay, number 3, embrace your constraints. So as you start to move up that S curve, there's this idea of, well, I'm just going to do this, and I need more time, I need more money, I need more expertise. But what we know from the law of physics, that it's actually, we need friction in order to climb that S curve. And I'll give you 3 examples to illustrate what I mean. The first has to do with the film Jaws. The most famous scenes in this film came about because the mechanical shark that Steven Spielberg wanted to use, it didn't work. So he's over budget, he's behind schedule, and he finally decides to shoot the scenes from the shark's point of view and let the music, right? We all know that music, and our imagination do the rest. Second example of why constraints are so important in climbing that S-curve is that there was a post-mortem of failed startups, and they divided them into startups that had funded, they'd gotten lots of money, and then the unfunded, those are the bootstrap startups. They hadn't had any money, they just had to build with what they had. Well, the number one reason that the funded startups, the ones that had money, went out of business, they ran out of money, they ran out of cash. And it was only the number 10 reason for the people who had built based on the resources that they had on hand. And then the third example is that skateboarders are some of the quickest learners in the world because they receive incredibly fast and useful feedback. Every action, every move that they make has an immediate consequence. So I ask you, skateboarders, Spielberg, startups successful in spite of or because of their constraints? Let's go now to number 4. Oh, before I do that, I want you to remember this, reframe to where your constraints, when you look at them, become a tool of creation for you. Okay, now let's go to number 4. Battle entitlement. This is the belief that my feelings, what I want to do, what I want to accomplish is more important than the people around me. It can happen in many, many ways. It comes in many guises. Like, for example, when we show up late to a meeting, we're basically saying my time is more important than your time. We're becoming entitled. When things are going well in our work, when things aren't going well in our work, it's easy for us to say, well, the world owes me. But when that happens, we stop asking questions that will allow us to improve. I think by your being in school, you are actually battling your entitlement. But be aware that the more successful you are, the more successful we are, the more we tend to think we deserve our success. And I love this quote from Judith Glaser: we're more likely to be addicted to being right. She said, whenever you argue and win, you feel invincible. So you argue again because you're addicted to being right. That's number 4, is to battle our sense of entitlement, to be willing to ask questions and to not put what we believe and think as a priority above the people around us. The next one is to step back in order to grow. You crouch before you jump, you bring a fist back to punch. Personal disruption involves moving sideways, backwards, even down. You're being in school, you've taken a step back in order to grow. To outside observers, it sometimes looks like this, but sideways frequently can become a slingshot. That's number 5. Now let's look at number 6. You give failure its due. Whenever you start something new, you're going to have this fantasy of a simple over one, up one, over one, up one world. But that's not always the case, is it? Sometimes we are going to have things not work. My failures have included bombing a speech, being fired, and then backing a business that went bankrupt. The speech, they didn't like it, they hated it. When I was fired, I was devastated. And the business that blew up, how could I say, well, I'm a good investor? I felt more like a fraud. The thing that happens when we fail is that we need to remember that it is not the failure that's actually the problem, it's the shame that we feel around the failure. So it's shame that limits disruption. It's not the failure. I want you to remember that it's shame that limits disruption, not failure. Whether we see an experience as a failure or success, it is a choice. It is always our choice. So the up and the down are part of personal disruption. Failure is a constraint, a tool of creation. And now let's go to number 7, be driven by discovery. As a disruptor, you are in search of a market. It's not yet defined. You're looking to carve a path, your career that's not yet defined. You know where you want, you know that you have this purpose, this thing you're trying to accomplish, but you don't know how you're going to get there. You're an explorer, like Captain James Cook, who mapped a third of the globe. He didn't map it all at once. He mapped it one port at a time. The thing that's interesting about this is that this is very true for businesses. 70% of all successful new businesses end up in a very different place than where they started. And this is also true for us as disruptors. We take a step forward, we gather feedback, and then we adapt. That's what you've done with your career. That's what you'll do with your degree. You'll take a class, you'll say, how did this go? And then you'll adjust, and then you'll take a different class. So as a disruptor, we choose this path of discovery. We play where no one else is playing because we are driven. We're driven by discovery. So as we start to wrap up, these are the 7 accelerants of personal disruption. This is how we grow. We know we start at the bottom, we climb to the top, but we do that much more quickly, much more effectively when we use these 7 accelerants of personal disruption. So something that I want you just to be considering as we start to wrap up are, what are 1 or 2 insights that you've had as you've been listening to this that could help you grow faster? What are those insights? I hope that you're taking notes. It doesn't need to be a lot of insights. It can just be 1 insight, 1 thing that you might do differently to help you grow faster, to help you climb up that S-curve faster. All right, wrapping up. One of the things that no one tells you, the textbooks on disruption don't tell you, is that disruption is, by definition, it's scary and it's kind of lonely. Whenever you leave your comfortable perch of doing the things the way you've always done, there's this moment of free fall, this loss of identity, where your puke to excitement ratio is so high you feel like you're on a thrill ride to zero. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't disrupt. It just means if you feel scared and if you feel lonely, you're on the right path to disruption. We give so much time to building and buying disruptive companies, and we should. But if we actually want to disrupt, if we want to be an agent of change, if we want to be an agent of disruption, first we need to become its subject, because your organization, your company cannot disrupt. It cannot change unless you do. So with that, I will turn it back over to Laura to see if there are any questions that I can answer. And I think we're good. Yeah, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes for any questions that any of you may have.
Yeah, Whitney, thank you so much. This was really great, and also well done on the time. I think, yeah, you managed it very well. So if anyone has questions or reflections, comments, please use the chat and I'll read them out. And also, as you can see here on the screen, if you're curious to learn more about these accelerators and about self-disruption, you can take a look at Whitney's books. They're bestsellers. Disrupt Yourself. I have it right here, actually, next to my nightstand, and also Build an A-Team for those of you who might have a more position to hire or to manage teams. So I'm just taking a look at the chat. Seems like people are just reflecting and have enjoyed the chat. Thank you all. Any?
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm looking at them now. So McAndrew,
perfect.
That was great. No question. Thank you. You're most welcome. Oh, you found the quote. Okay, so Laura, you liked the quote about being addicted. Yeah, super.
I think there's a bit of an issue with other people being logged in my name. I'm not sure how that happens, but there seem to be several participants under my name.
Isn't that quote great that we're addicted to being right? I love that so much. It really is very helpful of recognizing that we need to battle our addiction. And then eye opener for you. Good. A10, I see you said, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just seeing if there's anything else. Any other comments? Oh, who's in engagement? Got Laura? Okay, some of you are in mastery in your job. Some of you are engagement in the middle. Excellent. Oh, my mic was low. Could you not hear me very well?
I had no issues. I had perfect audio.
Okay. Oh, shucks. Okay. I think I know why, but most of the times I'm stuck at the engagement layer of the S-curve. Will now start looking. Okay, wonderful, Trishala. Yeah, so that you can move up more quickly. I bet you this is the problem. It's probably better now. I should have done that a half an hour ago. Okay. Any other comments, or just, again, reflections, questions? And I apologize, I talk kind of fast.
So for those of you, and I know that some of you have already asked, there will be a recording of the session as well. So we have recorded it, and I will also share it with all of you after the session. There is a question from Shahrukh.
Okay.
So I'm just waiting for him to jot it down.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah. Okay, while we're waiting, Shahrukh, yeah, how we underestimate our strengths and overestimate our weaknesses. Yeah, so we overvalue our weaknesses, and our strengths, the reason we don't see them is that they're reflexive for us. Like we don't even, we talk about blind spots a lot, but our strengths are also blind spots for us. So I'm really glad that you picked up on that. And then I noticed, for those of you who have decided, yeah, the decision for you to be in school is absolutely a decision to be on a brand new S-curve and looking for ways to take market risk. It's very, very much the case. Shahrukh, what's your question? Okay. Okay, so maybe that's Shahrukh. How do I start implementing it in life? Okay, so some really quick ideas for you around that is, first of all, just say to yourself, okay, now I understand that my life is an S-curve, my career is an S-curve, my job's an S-curve, ELU, my degree that I'm getting in is an S-curve. So once you're aware of that, then you can start saying, okay, so where am I and what's the emotional experience that I'm having? Am I discouraged? Okay, that's normal. I'm supposed to feel this way. Am I enjoying myself? Okay, that's normal. This is like, I'm in this sweet spot. Am I at the high end? Am I feeling kind of like, oh, I need to do something new? That's normal. That tells you they're the top end of the S-curve. So those would be a starting point, of just be able to have that map in your head and help you think through what's happening in your career and the roles that you're in right now. The second thing I would say in terms of starting, whatever those accelerants were that I said that kind of jumped out at you, just think about that. But one good place to start, a simple place, is over the next couple of days, when you get a compliment from someone, write that compliment down and just reflect on that and ask yourself the question, okay, so they just told me I'm good at this. Am I using that strength that I have every day in my work? Or how could I use it even more than I'm currently using it? The other thing that you can be doing to start is, the next time you find yourself saying, oh, I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough buy-in for these ideas, how can that constraint that you're experiencing become a tool of creation? Like, how can it get you to think differently about the problem? So those would be 2 places or 3 places. Have that S-curve in your mind, and then write down the compliments, and then look at the constraints that you're experimenting. Okay. I hope that's that answered your question, Shahrukh. Okay, so I have a curious question. Let's see. You very much said that when you're scared and feeling low, you're on the right path. Have you ever felt low on energy? When I feel like I'm losing on health, focus, and finance. How do you handle it? Okay, Trishal. Okay, Trishal, that's a really great question. So here's what I would say about that. So sometimes I want to distinguish between the two. Sometimes you're on the right curve, and sometimes you're on the wrong curve. So here are some 4 questions you can ask yourself of, like, maybe I'm not on the right curve. So question number 1 you can ask yourself is, okay, am I playing where no one else is? Like, am I finding ways to take on market risk? So for example, if you're in a job where you think it's your job to do this, and there's another person doing that exact same thing, you're now taking on competitive risk. And that is not playing where no one else is playing. So that's a signal that maybe it's not the right place. The second question, okay, so am I playing where no one else is playing? Second question is, am I playing to my strengths that we just talked about? Third question is this hard, but is it hard, but I'm still enjoying myself? Or is it hard and I have no energy and I'm getting sick? That might be a signal that this isn't the right curve. And then the fourth question you can ask yourself is, am I gaining momentum? So those are some things that you can ask yourself. Is this the right curve, or is this the wrong curve? And if all your answers to that question or those questions are no, then it might be time for you to jump to a new S curve which is perfectly okay. We're on lots of different S curves. The odds of success that you're on the right S curve are about 36%. So there's still a big chance that it's not the right S curve. So that's something for you to be aware of. The other thing that I would say to you is if it turns out that it is the right S curve and you're just tired, it might be that you just need to take a break. You need to do things like unplug all day, 1 day a week. It might be that you need to take a couple of days off because you love this S curve, you love what you're doing, but you're just a little bit tired. I have found that when I am willing to unplug on Sundays, that's our worship, our Sabbath day, it makes a huge difference in my ability to have energy during the rest of the week. So I hope that that's helpful, Trishala. Again, recapping, you might be on the right curve and just tired and you need to take a break. You might be on the wrong curve and you ask yourself those 4 questions. Am I playing where no one else is playing? To my strengths? Is it hard but not debilitating? And am I gaining momentum? Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm going to answer this last question and then we'll wrap up. So your weaknesses. Yes, the answer is yes and no. So when you're moving up this S curve, you're going to have some weaknesses that if you don't deal with them, these are your blind spots, you could end up falling off the curve or getting pushed off the curve. So to the extent that those are going to block your ability to be successful, then you need to work on them. But don't spend too much time on them, because where you're going to be really successful in your life is if you manage your weaknesses. Either you manage them a little bit, or if it's something that you're not good at, you hire other people to do it, but then you focus on your strengths. Because what we know from the neuroscience is wherever you have a lot of strengths, it's a lot easier to have a lot more strengths. And so if you're already good at something, it's a lot easier to get great at something. And you're going to make your greatest contribution in your work and in your life by playing to your strengths. So manage your weaknesses, deal with your blind spots, but then focus on your strengths. So back over to you, Laura. I hope those answers were helpful to you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Whitney. And I think I love that you also gave very concrete advice that I hope everyone can do something with. And I think that all of us wish we had more time. This was really fantastic. Thank you again so much.
You're very welcome.
And as you can see, here are some of the ways that you can reach or follow Whitney as well. And I'll be sharing the recording over email. So thank you everyone for joining, and hope to see you at the next webinar. That will be
Laura,
on Friday.
Laura, let me say one last thing, everybody. If you listen to podcasts, you can get a lot more information on this if you go to my website, podcast episode 100 and 120. Listen to those 2 episodes, and that will develop a lot of what we talked about today. Okay? 100 and 120. All right. Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Take care. Bye-bye.